So now we're ready to really start getting into physics, and we're ready to start talking about large groups of particles and the everyday objects that we see in our world. So we're going to start talking about particles and systems. But first we're going to define what is a system. So when we talk about a system, what we're really talking about is particles that interact within a boundary. Okay, so particles interacting within a boundary. And so that's a system. So for example, we could have an atom. So an atom is, kind of some fuzzy cloud of a nucleus, with this other kind of cloud of electrons that's around it. And so you notice that I'm drawing this cloud, as we've kind of mentioned before, just because, I want you to get away from that picture of picturing an atom as just a bunch of balls in the middle with this other ball that goes around them. But we can picture, an atom as, you have a bunch of, quarks kind of in the nucleus with an electron that has, some that's tied to it in this big cloud around the outside of it. And but so those protons and electrons are interacting because the protons are positively charged, the electrons are negatively charged, and so this interaction is what keeps an atom in place. Okay, another thing that we could look at would be something like a metal. So a metal would be a system where we're just we're assuming that all of the little atoms that make up the metal are all tied together and bonded together, and so the system is just talking about how they interact with one another and pull on one another, and we'll be able to really explore this more once we get into some later lectures. Another example would be a gas. So a gas is something where we really do have just kind of a lot of particles together, and so we can imagine all these particles kind of bouncing off of one another and changing directions like all the time, and that's what a gas really is. But notice that if we want to talk about something realistic, like if we're talking about something here on Earth, whatever boundary we draw is really kind of artificial. This is something that we're putting in there. It's imaginary. So depending on how good we are at choosing what our boundary is, it's going to change how accurately our system reflects what's really happening physically. And so for example, I could have a box. This is actually, a fairly well-defined boundary with a bunch of particles on the inside. So the system, I could still consider the particles, but now I would say that there's that externally from those particles, they're also having some kind of interactions and collisions with this box, because the box is going to be pushing back on them. So if they interact with that, they're going to be changing their direction when it comes to that. So that's really what we're going to be talking about in this chapter, is what happens if we have these big collections of particles, and how do we describe the differences between these internal actions inside of the particle versus external things. So if we have like one system colliding with another system.